So I thought this could be a fascinating topic for a video. Every year there are some dark horse teams, some teams that we sit here and say, okay, no one's really predicting them to win the Super Bowl, but they could win the Super Bowl. Maybe they're a dark horse. Maybe they're kind of something where if you call it and are correct, you'd feel very good about it, and it can definitely get some clicks on your YouTube channel if you predict them to be the eventual Super Bowl champion. But I kind of thought, okay, how often does that dark horse team actually perform well and live up to the hype? A good example of a dark horse team heading into this season would be the Detroit Lions, right? A team that a lot of people are saying, it should be better this year. There's a lot of hype around, but they haven't actually shown it yet. So no one's, they're not obvious. I decided this could be an interesting thing to go back, look at previous dark horse teams, and talk about which ones performed well and which ones didn't. So I found 31 teams spanning the past decade that, just reading various articles and things that felt like they were dark horse contenders heading into the season. And I looked at their stats, and here's what I came up with. So this will be the chart. I will fill it out as we go. Right now, 31 eligible teams, 14 of which made the playoffs, which is an okay number, right? 14 teams, that's 45.2%. So out of these teams saying, like, okay, these are dark horse teams, these could be real contenders, some of them ended up being at least, good. Although it is probably worth mentioning that more often than not, the dark horse team doesn't even make the playoffs. So I guess you could look at it either way. You could look at it and say, okay, there is some evidence to support that being a dark horse team could be good. There might not be strong evidence to support that the dark horse team will be, will like for sure make the playoffs is maybe the way I want to phrase it. And when you get into the teams that really are able to go on deep runs, it gets a lot worse. Only 3 have made the conference championship as a dark horse. Only 2 made the Super Bowl, and only 1 was a Super Bowl winner, although a bit of an asterisk that I did not include the Los Angeles Rams when they added Matt Stafford and then won a Super Bowl, because I really didn't see people talking about them as a dark horse when I went back and was doing research. It was mostly talked about as like legitimate contenders. That's where the hype was. That kind of surpassed that. The team that won the Super Bowl was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who were kind of considered a dark horse at that point. People weren't necessarily picking them to win, although people were saying, look out for them. Maybe if they reached their potential, they could. So that's the one team to win. Worth mentioning, the one team to win as a dark horse did it by adding the greatest quarterback of all time. Okay, that'll maybe get it done. The other team to make the Super Bowl was the Cincinnati Bengals, who, again, kind of their way was, it was, again, the quarterback thing, right? Going from having, okay quarterback play. Burrow had a good rookie year, but then got hurt. So they had solid quarterback play, but going from that to elite quarterback play the following year, along with, other things like Jamar Chase being an elite wide receiver, adding an elite quarterback and elite wide receiver will help you get there. And, they still had to kind of scratch and claw their way through that postseason run to get there, but they were still a very good team. And then 3 conference championship appearances. So the other one was actually the Cardinals in, I believe that was 2015, was, when they lost to the Panthers, got smoked by them. That was the other, team to go on a deep run after being a dark horse. So, if you're a dark horse team, a little under 10% made the conference championship, 6.5 made the Super Bowl, and just 3.2 won the Super Bowl. So it's not overly likely for you to win the Super Bowl or go on a massively deep run as a dark horse team, which does kind of make some sense, right? For one thing, a lot of these examples, I had several teams from the same year. Okay, you can't have multiple Super Bowl winners in the same year. So, it's not the maximum possible percentage for each of these categories actually is still under 100%. That is kind of worth noting. But I still was, I would say, a little bit surprised by just how low the odds were for some of these teams, or for some of these situations, to really go on a deep run. Again, I was surprised that under half made the playoffs. I would have guessed more than that. I would have guessed a decent chunk make the playoffs, right? If you're a dark horse team, which I kind of left that purposely vague, because sometimes people say dark horse as in like a team that could make the playoffs. Sometimes people say dark horse as in a team that could win the Super Bowl. But I kind of, left it vague because, I feel like dark horse is usually better than playoffs. I feel like almost like a dark horse team, you almost just expect them to make the playoffs. A great example of an implosion was, remember the Freddie Kitchens Browns they were an absolute dark horse, and they just fell apart. Feels like that is just as likely to happen as just the team not even fully living up to their potential, but just being good enough to make the postseason. Again, these out of all of these teams, another thing worth noting is there was only one seed. Out of all of the dark horse teams, only one seed throughout, and that was the Baltimore Ravens, who went 14-2 that year in Lamar Jackson's second year. They were a dark horse team, and then, that looked really good until it didn't in the playoffs, but I would still say that's kind of a team that lived up to their expectation. But the reality is, kind of the way I view this, kind of my takeaway is like, it does kind of make sense, because if you're a dark horse team, the reality is there are going to be other teams that are favorites, right? You're inherently not the favorite heading into the season, so the odds of you winning the Super Bowl are a bit slim. They just are. The odds of that happening are not something that you necessarily expect to have happen. And again, what counts as a dark horse is a bit subjective. Maybe, if you did this list, the numbers would be a little bit different. That's also worth mentioning. But, the reality is there's some really good teams. And for basically, all this list, either the Chiefs or the Patriots have been there, who aren't going to ever be dark horses. I guess, maybe you could argue the Chiefs were a dark horse when they won the Super Bowl, or even made the Super Bowl the year, not made the Super Bowl, made the conference championship in Mahomes' first season. You could argue about that, but still, this is a situation where those two teams are there for all of this. Like, that's going to kind of take away from a lot of other teams' chances to do that. They're always going to be the favorites, and they're going to get very far and win a good chunk of those. So, the reality is, it's kind of just an example of, the best teams typically are the ones that win. As much fun as it is to predict the Detroit Lions to win the Super Bowl, and hey, the odds aren't zero, right? Even if you say the odds are 3.2%, you'll take that. The Lions will gladly take that, and they'll gladly take a 45.2% chance of making the playoffs, probably. At the same time, the odds are that, I would say a team that has consistent success, like maybe Philadelphia, probably should still be the favorite over a team like the Detroit Lions, and should be the team that you're focused on getting there. And also it's worth mentioning that, I brought up the Chiefs. The Chiefs weren't talked about when they went to the conference championship in Mahomes' first year. They weren't really talked about as a dark horse team. I thought they would be, but I couldn't really, in the articles I read about predicting dark horse teams, they weren't really mentioned, and they were the team that broke out and were able to be that actual dark horse contender. A lot of times, it's not the dark horses that you expect, and even the Bengals, I was kind of surprised to see them on the list. I don't know if you would say that they're an obvious dark horse team heading into that year. Just kind of worked out that way. Jacksonville was kind of the dark horse team this past year. Maybe you could have predicted it, but maybe you wouldn't have. Actually, I believe they were a dark horse team. They were one of the 14 that made the playoffs. But you know what I mean? Sometimes it's the teams that you don't expect to really go on that deep run. I just thought it'd be an interesting topic of discussion. So yeah, those are my thoughts on all of this. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.